The boardroom went dead silent. Philip slammed his fist on the polished table, his face red with anger. "You are a deranged fool if you think taking this deal is anything but brilliant." His voice echoed off the glass walls. Nervous laughter rippled through the room like a disease. I felt my face burn hot, but I kept my expression stone cold. The executives around the table shifted in their seats, avoiding my eyes. Some actually smirked. Philip leaned back in his chair, a satisfied grin spreading across his face, like he'd just won something important. The silence stretched forever. My hands stayed flat on the table, steady as rocks. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across everyone's faces. I could smell someone's expensive cologne mixing with the bitter coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The leather chairs creaked as people adjusted uncomfortably. Outside the windows, the city buzzed with normal life while my career hung in the balance. Inside, my heart pounded, but outside, I was ice. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. This wasn't over. Not even close. Philip had no idea what he'd just started. The game was about to begin, and I already knew how it would end. And that's when I started planning. Let me tell you who I am. My name is Gia, and I've been a senior financial analyst at this company for 5 years. While everyone else chases the spotlight, I work quietly behind the scenes. I'm the one who spots the problems before they explode. I'm the one who saves this company from disaster after disaster. My desk sits in the corner, away from the executives' offices. I like it that way. I can see everything and hear everything, but people forget I'm there. That's my superpower. I've stopped 3 major financial mistakes in the past 2 years alone. Each time, someone else got the credit. I didn't care then. I cared about the work, not the glory. I'm precise. I'm careful. I double-check everything twice, then check it again. Other people call me paranoid. I call it thorough. My coffee mug reads "Trust but Verify," a gift from my mentor when I started here. I arrive early every morning and stay late most nights, diving deep into spreadsheets and market reports that others find boring. My bookshelves are filled with risk management guides and financial analysis textbooks that I actually read for fun. While Philip makes flashy presentations with fancy graphics, I dig into the real numbers. The boring stuff that actually matters. I hate risks that aren't worth taking. I especially hate reckless gambles that could destroy everything we've built. 2 weeks earlier, I found the proposal sitting in my inbox like a ticking bomb. The subject line read, "Exclusive Partnership Opportunity, Urgent Review." I opened it and felt my stomach drop. On paper, it looked amazing. A flashy new supplier offering exclusive deals and priority access. The numbers seemed too good to be true, because they were. I spent 3 hours digging deeper, following every link, checking every reference. What I found made my blood run cold. The supplier's financial history was a mess. 6 months ago, they'd missed major deliveries to 3 different clients. Their penalty clauses were brutal. One mistake could cost us millions. Worse, their entire operation relied on delivery pipelines that had never been tested at scale. It was like building a house on quicksand and hoping for the best. I printed everything and highlighted the danger zones in bright red ink. My desk looked like a crime scene covered in documents, sticky notes, and empty coffee cups. I called former clients of the supplier, pretending to be doing routine vendor research. The stories I heard made my skin crawl. Missed deadlines, broken promises, and customer service that vanished when problems arose. This wasn't just risky. This was corporate suicide wrapped in a pretty bow. I had to warn someone. I had to stop this before it started. I knocked on Philip's office door the next morning. He looked up from his phone, annoyed. "What is it, Gia? I'm busy." I sat down and spread the documents across his desk. I reviewed the supplier proposal. "We need to talk about some serious concerns." Philip barely glanced at the papers. "Concerns? What kind of concerns?" I pointed to the financial records. "They've missed major deliveries recently. Their penalty clauses could bankrupt us if anything goes wrong, and their delivery system isn't proven for the volume we need." Philip waved his hand like he was shooing away a fly. "You're being too pessimistic, Gia. You always look for worst-case scenarios." My voice stayed calm. "That's my job. These aren't worst-case scenarios. These are likely outcomes based on their track record." He leaned back in his chair. Sometimes you have to take risks to grow. You can't analyze everything to death. I gathered my papers. Can we at least get a second opinion? Philip was already looking at his phone again. I'll consider it. The dismissal in his voice was clear as glass. I could see my carefully researched warnings meant nothing to him. He'd already fallen in love with the big numbers and flashy promises. Facts were just obstacles to his vision of glory. But I could tell he wouldn't. He'd already made up his mind. 2 days later, Philip called an executive meeting. I should have seen it coming. He stood at the front of the conference room with his fancy presentation loaded up, slide after slide of projected profits and growth charts. The executives nodded and smiled. It looked perfect. Then Philip turned to me with that fake smile of his. Gia, you've reviewed this proposal. Why don't you share the opposing view with everyone? My stomach twisted. This was a setup. He wanted me to look like the negative person who killed everyone's excitement. I stood up slowly. There are significant risks with this supplier. Their financial history shows multiple delivery failures. The penalty clauses are extremely harsh. Their delivery infrastructure isn't tested for our volume needs. I laid out every concern clearly and calmly. Philip's smile got wider. Ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps companies small and scared. He looked right at me. You are a deranged fool if you think taking this deal is anything but brilliant. The room erupted in laughter. I felt every pair of eyes burning into me, measuring my humiliation. The laughter felt like needles in my ears. Philip's chest puffed out with pride at his clever put-down. The other executives chuckled and nodded, eager to side with the winner. I sat down, my face burning with shame. The break room felt like a war zone. I walked in to get coffee, and conversations stopped. People suddenly found their phones very interesting. I could feel eyes on me as I poured coffee with shaking hands. Behind me, I heard whispers. She's just jealous she wasn't part of the negotiations. Always so negative about everything. Trying to make Philip look bad, I stirred my coffee and pretended not to hear. At the corner table, 2 managers were talking louder than necessary. Some people just can't handle when others take bold action. Probably worried it makes her look bad for being so cautious all the time. I took my coffee and walked out with my head high. But inside, I was crumbling. 5 years of dedication, of saving this company over and over, and this is how they saw me. As the jealous analyst who couldn't handle someone else's success. The humiliation burned in my chest like acid. I'd never felt so alone in my entire career. My hands trembled as I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen without seeing anything. The office felt hostile now, full of people who thought I was either incompetent or jealous. Maybe both. The walls seemed to close in around me, trapping me in this nightmare of professional embarrassment. Something had to change. Someone had to pay for this. I sat in my car after work, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The parking garage was empty except for the security guard's radio crackling in the distance. I replayed the meeting over and over in my head. Philip's smug face, the laughter, the whispers in the break room. My hands were still shaking. For a moment, I thought about quitting, walking away from all of it. Finding a job where people respected my expertise instead of treating me like a paranoid fool. But then something else took over. Something cold and calculating. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. This was about proving I was right. Philip wanted to play games? Fine, I'd play games, but I'd play them better than he ever could. I'd treat this like chess, slow, careful moves until he was completely cornered with nowhere to run. I started the car and drove home, my mind already working on the first move. Philip had no idea what was coming for him. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The next morning, I started building my case. I created a folder on my personal encrypted drive labeled Project Documentation. Inside, I began storing everything. Every email Philip sent about the deal. Every overly optimistic projection he made. Every corner he cut in his research. I documented the supplier's missed commitments that Philip had ignored. I saved copies of their vague promises and non-binding agreements. I even recorded the exact words Philip had used in meetings, his absolute confidence that nothing could go wrong. I worked on this during lunch breaks and after hours, slow and steady, like building a puzzle piece by piece. I also started tracking Philip's behavior patterns. When he was most confident, when he made his biggest claims, when he was most likely to double down on bad decisions. I needed to understand my opponent completely. Every strength, every weakness, every blind spot. This wasn't emotional anymore. This was strategic warfare, and I intended to win. The first rule of war: know your enemy better than they know themselves. Sandra from logistics had always been invisible to Philip. She was a mid-level employee who actually made things work while he took credit for results. I found her in the supply room, checking inventory numbers on her tablet. "Hey Sandra, how's everything going?" She looked up, surprised. "Oh, hi Gia. Just the usual chaos." I smiled. "I've been wondering about our delivery tracking systems. They seem really complex." Sandra's eyes lit up. She loved talking about her work, and nobody ever asked. They are. Most people don't realize how many moving parts there are. I leaned against the shelf. "Would you mind showing me sometime? I'd love to understand the process better." Sandra nodded eagerly. "Sure, I could use the help anyway. Philip never gives me enough time to document everything properly." Perfect. I'd found my inside source. Over the next few days, I started spending my lunch breaks with Sandra. Officially, I was helping her organize delivery schedules. Unofficially, I was learning everything about our supplier relationships and delivery timelines. Information Philip never bothered to collect. The next Monday meeting was my chance to start phase 2. Philip was presenting his expanded timeline for the new supplier relationship. He wanted to increase order volumes by 40% within 6 months. Everyone nodded along with his aggressive projections. When he asked for questions, I raised my hand. "Philip, these growth numbers look fantastic. Have you considered pushing them even higher? Maybe 50%? Philip's face lit up like Christmas morning. "That's exactly the kind of bold thinking we need, Gia. I'm glad you're finally seeing the big picture." The other executives murmured approval. Look at that, even the cautious analyst was getting on board. I smiled and took notes as Philip started calculating even bigger numbers. After the meeting, he actually came over to my desk. "I'm proud of you for opening your mind to new possibilities," he said, patting my shoulder. I nodded humbly. "You were right about thinking bigger." Inside, I was grinning. Philip was so hungry for validation that he couldn't see the trap I was setting. The bigger his commitments got, the harder he'd fall when reality hit. Sandra's voice was worried when she pulled me aside Friday afternoon. "Gia, I've been looking at the new suppliers' capacity reports. They're already at 92% utilization." I frowned. "What does that mean exactly?" She showed me her tablet screen. "It means they're almost maxed out. If we increase our orders, like Philip wants, they won't be able to handle it. The whole system will bottleneck." I felt a cold smile creep across my face. How bad would that bottleneck be? Sandra did some quick calculations. Delivery delays of at least 3 weeks, maybe more. And that's if nothing else goes wrong. This was exactly what I'd been waiting for. The smoking gun that would prove Philip's plan was doomed from the start. I patted Sandra's arm. "Thanks for keeping an eye on this. Can you document those capacity numbers for me?" She nodded. "Already done. I always keep detailed records." I went back to my desk and added Sandra's report to my growing file. Philip was setting himself up for failure, and he didn't even know it. The trap was almost ready to spring. The networking lunch was at an upscale restaurant downtown. I spotted Caden immediately. He was one of our most valuable client contacts, someone who controlled millions in annual contracts. I'd met him a few times at company events, but never had a real conversation. Today, that would change. I approached his table with a friendly smile. "Caden, right? I'm Gia from the financial analysis team." He looked up and smiled. "Of course. Please sit down." We made small talk about the industry, about market trends, about the challenges of supply chain management. Then I steered the conversation where I needed it to go. "Can I ask you something hypothetical? If your primary supplier suddenly started having delivery delays, say 3 or 4 weeks, how would your company respond?" Caden's expression darkened immediately. "We'd start looking for a new partner that day. Our clients won't tolerate delays, so we can't tolerate them from suppliers." He took a sip of his wine. "Why do you ask?" I shrugged casually, just thinking about contingency planning. But inside, I was burning his answer into my memory. One delivery delay would be all it took. Monday morning, I made my first real move. I had an old market forecast on my computer, one that was 6 months out of date, but painted an overly rosy picture of supplier capacity in our sector. I accidentally forwarded it to Philip with a note, "Thought you might find this interesting for your presentation." Within an hour, Philip was forwarding it to the entire executive team. By Wednesday, he was using those outdated numbers in his board presentation to justify even larger supplier commitments. He never bothered to check the date on the report. He was so excited to have data that supported his aggressive plans that he didn't question where it came from. I watched from the back of the boardroom as he clicked through slides full of projections based on obsolete information. The board members nodded and approved expanded budgets. Philip was glowing with confidence. After the meeting, he stopped by my desk again. "Great research on that market report, Gia. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that moves companies forward." I smiled modestly, just trying to support the team. Inside, I was already planning my next move. Sandra found me in the coffee room Tuesday morning, her face pale. "Gia, we have a problem. One of the supplier's major subcontractors just filed for bankruptcy." I set down my coffee cup. "How big of a problem?" She showed me the news article on her phone. "They handle about 30% of our supplier's logistics network. This could create massive disruptions." I read the article carefully. The bankruptcy was unexpected. The company's assets were tied up in legal proceedings, and there was no clear timeline for resolution. This was the first domino falling. "Have you told Philip yet?" Sandra shook her head. "I sent him an email, but he hasn't responded." I wasn't surprised. Philip was probably too busy celebrating his expanded budget approval to worry about details like subcontractor stability. "Keep documenting everything," I told Sandra. "Every delay, every disruption, every impact." She nodded grimly. "This is going to get ugly, isn't it?" I patted her shoulder. "Probably, but at least we'll have records of what really happened." That afternoon, I added the bankruptcy news and Sandra's impact analysis to my growing file. The cracks were starting to show. The junior board member was named Austin, and he was new enough to still care about actual results instead of just politics. I'd researched him carefully. He had a background in risk management, which made him perfect for my purposes. I arranged to run into him at the coffee shop across from our building. "Austin, right? I'm Gia from Financial Analysis." He smiled and shook my hand. "Of course. I've heard good things about your work." We got coffee and found a quiet corner table. I kept the conversation light at first, talking about the challenges of working with new suppliers and managing risk in an uncertain market. Then I planted my seed. "I've been a bit concerned about how stretched our new supplier might be getting," I said carefully, "just from a capacity standpoint." Austin leaned forward. "What kind of concerns?" I shrugged. "Nothing specific. It's probably fine. I just worry when we put all our eggs in one basket." I took a sip of coffee, but I'm sure the leadership team has it all figured out. Austin nodded, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. "Risk management is always important," he said thoughtfully. I didn't push any further. Seeds needed time to grow. The first late shipment arrived on a Thursday. It was only 2 days behind schedule, but in our business, 2 days might as well be 2 years. I heard about it from Sandra first, then from the frantic emails flying around the office. Philip sent a company-wide message that afternoon. "Minor delay in first shipment due to unexpected weather. Supplier assures us this is a one-time issue. No impact on overall timeline." I carefully logged the delay in my documentation file. Date, time, explanation given, actual cause according to Sandra's logistics report. The actual cause wasn't weather. It was the capacity crunch that Sandra and I had identified weeks ago. But Philip wasn't about to admit that. He was doubling down on his optimism. In the next team meeting, he actually used the delay as an example of his proactive communication. "This is exactly why we have buffer time built into our schedules," he said confidently. "One small hiccup doesn't derail the entire operation." I nodded along with everyone else, but I was already anticipating the next delay. Because there would definitely be a next one. 2 weeks later, Philip called another strategy meeting. He was more excited than I'd ever seen him. "We have an opportunity to really accelerate our growth timeline," he announced. Our major client is willing to place a priority order if we can deliver 3 weeks early. The room buzzed with excitement. Early delivery meant bonus payments, enhanced relationships, and major bragging rights. Philip turned to me. Gia, I know you like to be cautious, but this could be huge for us. What do you think? This was it, the moment I'd been waiting for. I pretended to hesitate, looking thoughtful and slightly nervous. It's definitely a risk, I said slowly, but the potential rewards? I paused dramatically. I think we should go for it. Philip practically glowed. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Bold thinking pays off. He started drawing up plans for an even bigger order to meet the early deadline. I watched him commit to delivery dates that I knew the supplier couldn't possibly meet. Their system was already buckling under normal volume. This would break them completely. I went back to my desk and updated my documentation. The trap was set, and Philip had just walked right into it. Monday, second shipment delayed by 4 days. Tuesday, third shipment delayed by a week. Wednesday, major client sends email marked urgent, delivery concerns copied to the entire board. I watched it all unfold from my corner desk like watching a slow-motion car crash. Philip was running from meeting to meeting, making phone calls, sending increasingly desperate emails to the supplier. His confidence was cracking. In the emergency executive meeting, he tried to maintain control. These are temporary setbacks, he insisted. The supplier is implementing new processes to prevent future delays. But his voice shook when he said it. The board members exchanged worried glances. Our major client was threatening to cancel their priority order and find a new partner. Philip's bold gamble was turning into a nightmare. After the meeting, he slumped at his desk, staring at his computer screen like it might provide magical solutions. For the first time since this whole thing started, he looked genuinely scared. That's when I knew it was time. The moment I'd been building toward for months was finally here. It was time to bring the contingency out of the shadows. While Philip had been making flashy presentations, I'd been doing actual work. 3 weeks ago, I'd quietly reached out to Fletcher Industries, a reliable supplier with proven capacity and excellent delivery records. I'd spent my own time building a relationship with their sales team. I'd analyzed their capabilities, toured their facilities, and negotiated preliminary terms for a potential partnership. I had a complete proposal sitting in my desk drawer. Competitive pricing, guaranteed delivery schedules, proven capacity for growth, and ironclad penalty protections. Everything our current supplier wasn't providing. The proposal included detailed financial projections, showing how we could salvage the major client relationship and actually improve our profit margins. I'd even identified a 3-day implementation timeline to minimize service disruption. It was professional, thorough, and absolutely bulletproof. The kind of proposal that took weeks to develop properly, which was exactly what I'd spent the time doing while Philip was busy taking victory laps. Now I just had to wait for the right moment to reveal it. And based on Philip's increasingly frantic behavior, that moment was coming very soon. Friday afternoon, the board called an emergency meeting. Philip sat at the conference table looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually perfect hair was messy, his tie was crooked, and his hands shook slightly as he flipped through papers. "We need solutions," the board chair said bluntly. "Our major client is threatening to terminate their contract. We have delivery commitments we can't meet. What's your plan?" Philip stammered through a desperate presentation about renegotiating with the supplier, extending timelines, and offering compensation for delays. It was a disaster. The board members looked skeptical and angry. That's when the chair turned to me. "Gia, you raised concerns about this supplier from the beginning. Do you have any thoughts on how to move forward?" I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. "Actually, I do." I opened my laptop and projected my Fletcher Industries proposal. I've been working on a contingency plan. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out everything: the supplier analysis, the delivery guarantees, the financial projections, the implementation timeline. The room was completely silent. When I finished, the board chair looked stunned. "This is remarkably comprehensive. How long did this take you to develop?" I smiled modestly. "I started working on it 3 weeks ago, just in case." The board voted unanimously to implement my proposal and remove Philip as project lead. The decision took exactly 12 minutes. Philip sat frozen in his chair as they discussed his future, like he wasn't even there. "We need leadership that prioritizes risk management and thorough analysis," one board member said. "This situation could have been avoided with proper due diligence." Another added, "We can't afford this kind of oversight again." Philip finally found his voice. "I was trying to be aggressive, to grow the company. Sometimes that requires taking risks." The board chair cut him off. "There's a difference between calculated risks and reckless gambling. This was gambling." When the meeting ended, Philip gathered his papers with shaking hands. As he walked past my chair, he stopped and looked down at me. For a moment I thought he might say something, but he just walked away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Word spread through the office within hours. Philip was being reassigned to special projects, corporate speak for being pushed aside. People whispered about his dramatic fall from grace. I cleaned out my email and prepared for whatever came next. The game was finally over, and I had won. Monday morning brought an unexpected phone call. "Miss Gia, this is Blake from Worldwide Industries. We'd like to discuss a career opportunity with you." Worldwide Industries was the major client we'd almost lost. Apparently, they'd been impressed by my contingency planning and wanted to offer me a position leading their new supply chain risk management division. The salary was 40% higher than my current position. The title was Senior Director. The responsibilities included exactly the kind of strategic analysis I'd been doing in secret for months. "We need someone who can spot problems before they become disasters," Blake explained. "Your reputation for thorough risk assessment precedes you." I almost laughed. My reputation? 3 months ago, Philip had called me a paranoid fool. Now suddenly everyone wanted my expertise. I didn't accept immediately. I wanted to see how things played out at my current company first. But it was nice to know I had options, real options with companies that actually valued careful analysis over flashy presentations. The phone call lasted an hour, and by the end, I was already imagining my new corner office with windows and respect. Before I made any decisions about my future, I had one last task to complete. I organized every piece of documentation I'd collected over the past 3 months into a comprehensive dossier. Email threads showing Philip's dismissal of risk factors, financial projections based on outdated data, records of missed warning signs and ignored expert advice, Sandra's detailed reports on supplier capacity issues, documentation of the subcontractor bankruptcy and its predictable impacts, screenshots of Philip's overconfident communications to the board. Everything neatly organized, labeled, and cross-referenced. It told the complete story of how this disaster could have been prevented if anyone had listened to the warnings. I burned it all to a secure drive and made 3 copies. One for my personal records, one for my lawyer, and one for the board. I scheduled a private meeting with the board chair and handed over the final copy personally. "This is everything," I said simply, "in case you need it for future decisions." She flipped through the files, her expression growing more serious with each page. "This is incredibly thorough. Thank you for your diligence." I nodded and left her office, my work finally complete. My last day at the company was surprisingly quiet. I cleaned out my desk, backed up my personal files, and said goodbye to Sandra and the few colleagues who'd supported me through everything. Philip was nowhere to be seen. According to office gossip, he'd been called into meetings all week and was looking increasingly desperate. As I walked past the conference room where this whole thing started, I heard raised voices. Through the glass wall, I could see Philip arguing with 2 board members. His face was red, his gestures wild and defensive. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the writing on the wall. Someone was being told to clear their desk. I kept walking, my cardboard box balanced in my arms. In the elevator, I allowed myself a small smile. The deranged fool was leaving the building, but not the one Philip had expected. At the security desk, I turned in my badge and keycard. The guard smiled and wished me luck in my new position. Word traveled fast in corporate environments. I walked out into the bright sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in months. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new corner office overlooking the city skyline. My title read, Senior Director of Supply Chain Risk Management, on business cards that actually mattered. My team respected my expertise instead of questioning it. My recommendations were implemented instead of mocked. Best of all, I was working with the same major client that Philip had almost lost with his reckless deal-making. We were reviewing quarterly supplier performance reports when Blake laughed and shook his head. You know, you were absolutely right about that disaster with your old company. Taking that deal was a complete mistake. I smiled, remembering the conference room where it all started. Sometimes the biggest risks look like the safest bets. Through my window, I could see the building where Philip used to work. According to LinkedIn, he was now exploring new opportunities, corporate speak for unemployed. Meanwhile, my old company had implemented the Fletcher Industries partnership and was thriving under new leadership that actually listened to risk analysis. The irony was perfect. The deranged fool who'd been laughed out of the boardroom was now being courted by companies across the industry. Turns out, being called crazy pays pretty well when you're right.